Everybody, I am Leia Powell and welcome to Wildcat Mountain Artistry. I'm the one that makes the stained glass dragons that you find in the dealer's hall. Let me give you a little tour. This is my huge collection of glass. Those of you that have taken my workshops, this is actually where I get your glass from. It's smaller pieces that I can't use and other things. This is my cutting table. Some of you may recognize some of this work. I'm hanging on to it for you until the quarantine is over. Here's some more stuff. This is a grinder. This is a tool I'll show you how to use in just a little while. And this is what we're making today. We're going to make a little sun catcher from start to finish, and you're going to be in on it. So the first things that you need to learn are the tools of the trade. Those of you that have taken my workshops at JordanCon have received these exact same tools. So I'm going to use today what you would have used this year. First, we have a glass cutter. This is a pistol grip glass cutter. They call it that because when you hold it in your hand, you hold it somewhat like a gun. This is a straight cutter. So you actually get two different kinds of cutters with me. And I use this one mostly for the breaking ball, but I can also cut with a straight cutter in a different way. These are Grozer pliers. They actually help nip off little sharp edges of your glass to help you fit to your pattern. And these are running pliers. They have a concave, convex thing going on, and this is what you actually run your score line whenever you score your glass. So let's go ahead and get these unpacked. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you how to cut glass. And then once we get through that, I'm actually going to cut the glass for this pattern in front of you so that you can see how I do it. And also, we are going to grind the glass, copper fill the glass, solder, and clean the glass. So once we get done with this, you're going to have a complete sun catcher that you've watched me make. So, first of all, I've taken all of our tools, and I just have a plain, clear piece of glass here. So I'm actually going to take a Sharpie marker, and I'm going to draw some lines for us to cut with. So first of all, we're going to start with just some straight lines. And then we're going to put a little bit of curve into them. And then we're going to get really curvy. Cutting curves in glass is kind of a challenge. So I will do my best to show you how. Okay? So one thing that we do have to do, I have a bit of oil here. It's actually called cutter oil. And when you oil your surface, it actually helps you to glide your cutter along, and it keeps little bits of glass from popping up everywhere. And also I want to talk about this cutting surface. This is called a Morton grid, but what it is actually is it provides a flat surface for you. And when the little shards of glass fall, after you've cut some glass, they actually fall into the grooves and get off of your flat working surface. If you go to a Home Depot or a Lowe's or something like that, go in the light section. This is actually the same stuff that they use to put up in like ceiling lights over fluorescent lights, like in elevators and that kind of thing. And it's very inexpensive, and it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. So, like I said, this is a pistol grip glass cutter, and you're going to hold it like a gun. I'm putting my pressure on my thumb. So I'm going to come up about 1/8 of an inch up on the glass, and I'm pressing down really hard here. But listen. One thing that you need to make sure that you don't do is run off the edge of the glass, because that will dull your glass cutter. So once you've scored, you can see the oil here, but there's actually scratch that is on the glass. These are the running pliers I was telling you about, and you'll see that there is a groove here. That's where you know where to put the score, or put the pliers over your score. So I'm just going to put it on there and squeeze, and it breaks it right through. So again, You're going to hold it like a gun. You're going to keep this perpendicular to the glass. You want that nice, even sound. You're going to line it up and squeeze. Now, straight lines on, thin glass is easy to do. Anybody can do it, seriously. But once you get into cutting curves, it's a little different. Now, when you cut curves, you're actually going to have to swivel your wrists around. But what I suggest that you do is actually use your body to move. That way your hands don't get tired. So now, what I'm going to do is try to follow the outside of this line. You see how I'm moving my body with my hands? And my hands are steady, and you have an even amount of pressure. So you do it the same way, only now there's a curve in the glass. So let's do that again. I'm going to start about 1/8 of an inch in, score the glass, stop about 1/8 of an inch from the end, and this time I want you to watch the glint of the glass as the score runs. That's going to be easier for me to do with one of these harder ones. So when you begin the score, do you see how it started to run? See the light hitting it? You're going to go to the other side and do the same thing. And then sometimes you can just pull it apart, and sometimes you can use a breaking ball, which is what I'm about to do to show you. Those of you that are part Chihuahua, like my apprentice Nicole is, this is going to make a big pop, so just be aware. So once again, you see how that score line has started to run. Now, we're going to use this just like this. See how I just ran that score line just a little bit more to make it pop apart. So that's your glass cutting lesson. So now, let's talk about patterns. This is actually one of the patterns that you can do in one of my workshops. And the important thing is that you have two. The reason for that is that if one of them gets messed up, then you still have the other one to use for when you solder, when you put your pieces on top of the pattern to get the shape right. So I'm going to put this one to the side and make sure that it doesn't get wet or anything like that. Now, in this particular pattern, I've decided to use 4 different colors. I'm going to use clear for the middle. I'm going to use purple for these 4. I'm going to use blue for these long ones. And I'm going to use an amber for these outside pieces. I've already picked out my glass. So this is actually a very heavily textured glass. And this is what we're going to use for the center. The purple, this is actually called water glass, and you can see why. So this is the purple we're going to use today. This is actually my favorite color, naturally. So we're going to use this beautiful cobalt blue water glass. And then we're going to use amber water glass. Okay? So now, I'm going to move you. Okay. So now, I've picked some glass that actually we can see through, so we shouldn't have to have a light table. But any type of light table will work. A lot of people that don't have light tables actually will take their pattern and their glass and put it up against the window and use the light coming in from the window to illuminate the back of the glass so that they can draw this pattern. Now, one thing that I do want to make sure that you know is to keep 1/4 of an inch between each individual piece, okay? And also, you need to pay attention to the grain of the glass. You see how this water glass is moving this way? Well, we want to make sure that we keep that same direction on our pieces, and it really makes a difference whenever you start putting your pieces together and it hangs in the window. It can really detract the eye if you have the grain going in weird ways. So you just take a plain Sharpie marker, and we're actually going to very carefully draw out our individual pieces. If you guys ever did color by number stuff when you were a kid, this is the exact same thing, only it's with glass. And another thing is to make sure that you number your pattern, and you also have to number your piece. When you make a stained glass window that has 500 pieces of glass in it, that becomes a very, very important detail. With this, not so much, but still, it's a good habit to get into. So again, we're going to stay 1/4 of an inch apart, and I'm sorry for any glare that you may be running into this video. It's just me. Since we're under quarantine, my apprentices are kind of doing their own thing at home, and for that reason, it's just me. Another thing that you can do is once you have patterned your piece, put just a simple dot on the pattern so that you know that you have already done that one. Most of the glass that I actually use, believe it or not, is made in America. That is one American dominated industry. And I believe that this water glass was manufactured in Oregon. This particular pattern has 15 pieces in it. So this is just going to take a few minutes to get everything patterned. But the better that you pattern, the better it's going to look when you cut it. Because, you know, once you cut your piece, if your patterning is wrong, then your piece isn't going to fit your pattern. So that's our purple. Another thing I wanted to talk about is texture. There's no way that I can cut this way because of how heavily textured it is. So what do we do here? We turn it over. So what I'm going to do is turn the pattern over and also turn the glass over. Now this glass does have a texture, and it's very much going up and down. So I want to make sure that this little diamond that is in the center, that we're keeping that grain going this way. And now when you cut it on the back, once you're done, you know, it'll be right on the other side. This is number 13. Okay, we're getting there. Same thing on this particular glass. It being water glass, the grain is going that way. And another thing that you can do when you have consecutive pieces like this is you can pattern them all together. This is kind of a more advanced way of doing things, but these are pretty gentle curves, so I really think that you guys would be able to do it too. So I'm going to go ahead and pattern all 3 of these next to each other. And that way they'll be seamless. They'll fit perfectly next to each other. And then we have 3 more on the bottom. And remember, you always want to number your pieces. And put your dots. Okay. Now, these being pretty thin, these long pieces like this, we actually want to make sure that we keep that 1/4 of an inch apart from each other. Because thin pieces you have to be careful with. They will actually snap in the middle if you squeeze them too hard. So we want to try to avoid that if at all possible. And I'm keeping that grain in mind again. I'm keeping everything going this way. But I'm just going to step over about 1/4 of an inch. And the reason for 1/4 of an inch is that's about the width of half of your running plier head. So it can get a better grip that way. I use this glue in so many things, and I've made so many dragons for you guys out of this glass. So I'm excited that you actually get to see it in its full form this way. All right, very last piece. Okay, so now that all of our glass is patterned, we're actually going to go back over to the cutting table, and that's where we're going to cut our pieces out. Okay, so now this is the first piece that we're going to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is oil my cutter. Now, the way that I'm going to cut this is I'm going to score it like this. I'm going to cut that way, and then I'm going to cut that way. Then I'm going to go through here and go through here. And so I'm going to go ahead and score 4 times and pop the extra glass off of the piece altogether. You always want to cut on the inside of the line. The reason for that is because once you're finished and you have to grind your pieces, if you cut on the outside of the line, your piece is going to be way too big. And this is where the patterning of your glass is so important. Now, you'll notice that the excess glass I'm putting in this bucket, there's a reason for that. I have tons and tons of scrap glass that's just way too small for me to use. So, any of you guys that work on mosaics, if you ever want to travel to Alabama, you can come and get a bucket of it. So, this is a pretty big piece of glass. So, I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity to cut this apart so that I don't mess up this big piece. So in doing so, I'm actually going to score through 2 of my lines. I just caught the bottom of those 2 pieces. Do you see? And then once that is over there, I will just move that bigger piece over there. Okay, so with this, I'm going to take this long line and I'm going to cut on the inside of the line on each one to separate these 4 pieces of glass. And the reason for that is if you have a wonky cut and you actually break one of your pieces, you have preserved, your other pieces, and you also haven't messed up your bigger pieces of glass. So on these, I'm going to score across, around, and through the straighter part. So you may be wondering where I'm going to put my glass once it has been cut. And you can get these cups at the Dollar Tree for $1. And they are perfect for putting your pattern pieces in. Again, I've already cut one line, so I'm just going to follow through and cut the rest. And remember, these are the same exact tools that you get in my workshop. So I'm not using anything that's super expensive or anything like that. Stained glass is an expensive hobby to have just because the glass is so expensive. Solder is so expensive. A pound of solder is about $20 just by itself. But when you've been doing it like I have for 23 years, it's just kind of a part of you. And you figure out a way to keep doing it. So this is also a giant piece of glass. So I'm actually just going to score a little chunk out of it. this is another situation where you just want to preserve as much glass as you possibly can. For that reason, glass is expensive. Okay, now this is the one that I was telling you about where these are all thin pieces. So I definitely want to break them apart like I did the other ones. So I'm just going to go up one line of each individual piece. And the more you cut, the more you're going to figure out how much pressure to put down on your cutter. That's probably the hardest part about cutting glass, is finding that happy medium. And some glass is harder to cut than others. There are two different styles of glass. This is ribbon glass, and what that means is that when the glass maker actually manufactures the glass, whoever takes the gigantic bit of molten glass, they put it on a sort of conveyor belt, and then that conveyor belt runs it through a roller so that the glass is perfectly textured and perfectly, the thickness is all flat. So let me just show you a difference. This piece of blue glass is actually hand-rolled glass. Do you see this wonky edge here? That's just whenever they dumped the big glob of glass down before it was ran through. This is actually what you get on the edge. And you see how uneven that glass is? This is really hard to cut. This is ribbon glass. You see how uniform it is, and it's pretty thin. This is what I generally try to give you guys to cut, because this stuff is really tough if you're not used to cutting glass. You may wonder how I can see this line. Just so that you're aware, the glint of my fluorescent lights actually helps me with that. But you can use a silver Sharpie marker if you want. It is just a nightmare to get off the glass after the fact, which is usually why I don't use it. But sometimes you have to, like on black glass, for instance. My apprentice Rachel is not a fan of me doing this way because she can't see the line. That's right, Rachel, I'm telling you. One more of this blue, and then we have 6 pieces left, and everything will be cut. And as you can see, once you have everything patterned, you can just move right through it. There are a lot of stained glass artists that I have seen through the years that have been taught to make an individual piece, or to cut an individual piece of their pattern, and then go in and grind it and put it on their pattern, and then come back and start all over again. It wastes just a ton of time if you do it that way. And if you make stained glass kind of like I do, where I have a 6 to 8 waiting list all the time, it's better to go ahead and pattern out multiple projects. That way you just work in stages, and you almost do it as an assembly line, and it helps you get through things. Okay, so this is where I actually patterned those 3 pieces really close together. And what I did was I scored this line, and I'm scoring here, here, and here. So when I break it, I need to really pay attention to that. So there's one. Now I'm going to move up on the glass a little bit and kind of stay away from these other pieces to pop that piece out. Same here. Now this is also where really sharp things happen, so be very careful. 3 more. I've been told over the years that I make this look really easy, and I'm sure today is going to be no different. There are a lot of people that are actually flying in to come and work with me for a weekend. Emily and Melinda came, and Mandy Todd and Jessica Hansen have all come here and taken classes. Okay, so all of our glass are done now. So the next thing that we need to do, because this is the copper foil method of stained glass. The copper foil method was developed by Louis Comfort Tiffany. I'm sure you've heard of Tiffany lamps. That's the reason he came up with it, because the lead king method of stained glass is really hard to get with three-dimensional things, and as you know, that's kind of my shtick. So do you see how shiny the edges of this glass are? You're not going to get anything to stick to that. So we have to grind the edges of each individual piece. So now we go over to the grinder table. So a grinder is actually a machine that has a water reservoir in it that catches all of the excess glass, which basically turns into sand again. And this bit is actually covered in diamonds, and that way it can scratch up the glass. And the sponge actually keeps that bit from getting too hot. So when you turn on the grinder, it just begins spinning it around in a circle really fast. And that way, you can actually take your glass piece, and this is going to get loud, and you're roughing up that edge. See how rough it is now? That's what we're going for on all the sides of each individual piece. This is also where your numbers will come off if you're not careful. And I'm just applying even pressure on this. And the reason for that is that if I don't, then you're going to have like a divot in the glass. And you'll be able to see that whenever you stop it. So just nice, even pressure. And I guess you can see that, can't really see, but I'm dipping each individual piece in water every time I finish grinding it. And that is so that I can wash the excess glass off the edges. This is also where you can cut up your fingertips, and probably why I can't feel mine very well over these. I cut them up and have so much scar tissue on my fingers. But my apprentice Nicole, we actually used to work at a financial institution together, and we were talking about this situation one day, and came up with kind of an idea. She puts these on her fingertips, and this is actually something a banker uses to count, dollar bills, just so that you can flip through them really fast. And that seems to have been able to save her little fingers from getting all cut. When I finish grinding these, I'm actually, after I wash them off, I'm just sitting them on a towel, just to get them out of the way so I can get everything ground. I'm hoping that once you guys watch this, you'll be able to appreciate the stained glass that you have, especially the three-dimensional stuff that I make for you guys. Because, these little flat things they're pretty simple. I mean, pretty much anybody can do these. You could do these too. If I had the time and the space in JordanCon, I would actually be able to work with all of you guys to do all of this. But I would basically have to move my entire workshop there in order to be able to teach, the 25 or so students that I teach every year. Okay, so that is all the pieces of glass. So now what I'm going to do is go over here and dry these off, and I'll be with you in a second. So your next step after you've ground everything is fitting. And fitting is terribly important because you don't want to get everything copper foiled and soldered together, or start soldering it and realize that you have a piece that is too small, that you're going to have to fill a gap with solder, or, you know, if you're actually making a stained glass window that is going to fit in an actual window, you're going to have exact measurements that you have to fill, you know, in order to make sure that it fits the hole that it's going to live in. So just so that you're aware, I have purposely cut number 12 too small. It should be blatantly obvious which one it is. So I would definitely want to recut that one so that it fits as well as the rest of them do. Now, copper foil tape is literally copper that has a sticky side. Now you have different backings as well. You have silver-backed copper foil, you have regular copper, and then there's even black-backed foil if you're going to patina your solder lines, or you know, there's a variety of different widths. I primarily use 7/32, just so you know. The reason that you have silver-backed copper foil is if you have a clear piece of glass like the one that we have here. Whenever you solder everything together, if the interior of this line is copper, it's going to detract the eye from the glass. It's going to be a glaring flaw that's actually in the sun catcher. So for that reason, we're going to use this silverback stuff. Now, what you do when you copper foil is you always want to, especially when you're dealing with something freeform like this, is you're going to want to make sure that where you start and stop the copper foil is going to be on the interior of a solder line. So you actually would not want to start and stop your copper foil anywhere one of these outside lines is going to be. And the reason for that is it's easy to pull that up with a fingernail or something like that if it's mishandled, and it just gives it a little bit more strength. So you take your piece that you just roughed up with the grinder, and you're going to center the glass on the tape. And the way that I hold this is I have the backing in these fingers, and I'm using these fingers to actually wrap this tape around the outside of this glass while keeping it centered on the copper foil. And then when I get to the end, I'm going to make sure that those are overlapped really well, and then just use my fingernail to tear it. It's really, it's not that thick. It's really simple to do. Then you use this terribly expensive tool to burnish it down. Now, if you start burnishing this way, you're really not getting anything accomplished because it's on that edge. You want to burnish it flat to what you just ground so that it sticks to it really well. Louis Comfort Tiffany developed the copper foil method of stained glass when he wanted to do something, you know, a little different than what the lead cane method of stained glass had afforded him. I know that you've all probably seen a Louis Comfort Tiffany stained glass window, but you're probably going to remember Tiffany lamps before you remember anything else. Now I've done the outside of this edge, and now I'm going to go on the inside. Now this is very bumpy glass, so I'm just doing the best that I can to make sure that this is burnished along that edge. And I actually used my fingers to pinch it down over the edges. So I just want to make sure that it's really, really stuck to the glass. So Louis Comfort Tiffany, around the 1900, the turn of the century of 1900s, he actually developed this, and that's what he started making his lamps with. And I'm sure when you think about Tiffany lamps, you're thinking about curves and floral patterns and really complicated things. And had he not came up with this particular method of stained glass, that never would have been a possibility. So again, I'm going to take and use copper for the rest of this because you can't see through the glass to see the edges like you could with that one clear piece. So again, I'm going to start and center that copper foil on the glass and pull the backing off as I go and center all the way around. It takes a little while to figure out how to hold your hands. So when you first start doing this, Don't panic. It's fine. There are a lot of stained glass artists. There are a lot of different methods. I actually went through 3 different apprenticeships before I became a master, and every single stained glass artist did it. I'm sorry. Every single stained glass artist did a little differently. So I basically took, you know, those 3 experiences and combined together to what I do now. Again, we're flattening this out all the way around, and then using the flat of the Sharpie to burnish it down. There's not one tried and true way to make stained glass. You know, there have been, stained glass has been around a long, long time. I think the oldest stained glass window that's still in existence was made in the year 1100. So, you know, if you really pay attention to what you're doing and you really dedicate a lot of time and effort, you know, these things could be around for quite some time. You can hand them down to your grandkids and their grandkids, etc., and so forth. And that's one thing about this particular art that is kind of fantastic. So I am going to keep copper foiling these, and in the interest of time, again, I'm just going to pause you a minute and finish this up, and I'll be back with you in just a second. Okay, so everything is copper foiled now. That one purple piece that was so crazy has been recut. It looks kind of neat with the copper foil, huh? So now we have to solder it together. So this is another reason why you actually have 2 different patterns, because you're probably going to mess one of them up. Now, one thing you've got to know about soldering, and with stained glass, particularly the kind that I make, is my solder actually does contain lead. So you want to make sure that, you know, you don't let your kids chew on it. Not that I think that you would, but just keep that in mind. So for that reason, you always want to solder in a well-ventilated area, and you always want to wear gloves when you're handling it. Now, just picking up a dragon for a few minutes and setting it back down is fine, just as long as you're not gnawing on it. So, the next step is to actually tack your stained glass. Now, if you've ever been around plumbers or anything like that, they use a chemical called flux, which is actually an acid. And this is what actually allows the solder to bind to the copper foil. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some flux where every 3 pieces meet. And this is called tacking. You're just basically holding it together until you can get your line straight. So this is kind of your last chance to recut anything or to change anything. And you want to make sure that these pieces are in, you know, the place that you want them to be. So this is gel flux. It comes in paste and it comes in liquid. The liquid flux, to me, smokes too much. You always want to solder in a well-ventilated area. And the paste flux just gets everywhere. So this is kind of the best of both worlds. It's a little more expensive, but to me, it's worth it. Okay, so now that everything has been fluxed, I'm actually going to just adjust the glass to exactly where I want it to live. And you're always going to have a little bit of a gap, I mean, here and there, but which is to be expected, but you just want to make sure that it's not something that's going to be glaringly obvious when you do happen to solder. So this is a soldering iron. It's an 80-watt soldering iron. With a 1/4-inch chisel tip on it. And it's probably going to get to around 600 degrees whenever we start melting the lead. So I am actually going to step away for just a second and set up a box fan so that we have a little bit of ventilation. It'll get a little bit loud in here, but you know, that's just the way it goes. Hold on just a second. Okay, so here we go. So now that my soldering iron is heated up, this solder is thicker than what you're probably used to seeing if you've soldered before. It doesn't have a rosin core. It's just pure 60-40. It's 60% tin and 40% lead. So we're going to not choke Jessica Hansen's dragon over here. Alright, so we're going to put just a dot of solder to hold together where every 3 pieces meet. And you can probably see the smoke coming off of there. That's why we've got the fan running. They make fancy, very expensive fume catchers and all manner of safety equipment to help you get rid of these fumes, but honestly, a box fan has always been my go-to, and I will just continue to use it. So now that everything is together, you can actually slip your pattern and try to save it out from under it. So, see how it's all held together at the joints? So now, we're going to solder the rest. So we're going to flux all the copper. You don't have to gob it up or anything. Okay. Alright, so what I typically do is just go along the outside. When you solder, you actually want to find like the little sweet spot on your soldering iron that takes the solder. For me, on this particular one, is on the side of the tip. And if you'll notice that while I'm doing these outside edges, I'm keeping the tip flat. And that's just so that I make sure that that outside edge of copper is completely covered with the lead. And you see how it's kind of falling over the edges? That's fine. That's actually a good thing. That just keeps us from having to load it up later. Now, when you start actually going through your lines, you want to use your chisel tip to kind of drag between the pieces of glass. It just kind of helps it. And this is what takes a lot of practice. The object of soldering well is for anyone to look at your particular lead lines and not be able to tell which direction you went with the iron. And that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that they're uniformly smooth. We want to make sure they're all about the same height. And one thing that you can always do is you can, if you have a line that's a little messed up, you can always go and reheat it again. So what I typically do when I start working on a line, I actually go ahead and go to the next one and go down a little bit on it. That way that joint is already smooth and I just have to meet back up to the end of that solder line. This is another thing that people tell me that I kind of do easy, but you know, honestly, when I first started doing stained glass, this is the thing that really came naturally to me. It took me a little bit longer to learn how to cut glass very well, but soldering was always something that I was able to enjoy and be able to learn pretty quick. I've always been a bit of a tomboy, so I messed around with out in my dad's workshop with them all the time, so I wasn't afraid of it or anything like that because I'd seen my dad weld so much. And sometimes you're going to get kind of a bit of copperfull that does not want to take the solder so much. You see how bubbly that is? Usually all you've got to do is just put a little bit of flux on it. And then you can go back over it. And smooth it back out. Okay. So I was always saying earlier, you know, stained glass supplies have gone up so much. And one thing that I know that you guys probably get a little bit tired of me harping on the fact that I want to teach you how to make this, but you know, stained glass artists are quitting in droves because of the price of all of the supplies, and eventually there aren't going to be any of us left. So I'm trying to teach as many people as I possibly can, you know, as cheap as I possibly can, so that this dying art can keep going. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's become a bit of a mantra with me because I just really, really hate to see, you know, so many talented individuals quitting just because of a price tag. every single stained glass shop that I was trained at has closed. In fact, most of them actually sold their supplies to me, which, you know, was, believe me, I could use them, but it was still heartbreaking to have to take that away from them, you know, but they knew it was going to a good home. Actually, recently, the very first stained glass shop where I started working closed. So, you know, I'm really, really trying to get other people interested, and I do want to give a shout out to quite a few of you guys who have taken, you know, the little bitty glass cutting class that I gave you at JordanCon and kind of rolled with it. I especially want to mention Erin De Simone. She went home and actually took a stained glass class from a local stained glass shop and made a pretty sizable window, and it looks absolutely fantastic. So shout out to her because she's done so well. There are quite a number of you that have taken the glass home and the tools home and the method that I showed you actually at the con and have made your own thing. You know, Jessica Tansley, Emily, and Melinda Downing, Jessica Hansen. There's so many of you, but look how cool that is. So that's just one side. Now we have to solder the other side. But there are, you know, a lot of you have contacted me asking for patterns, and, you know, I always jump right on it because I want to encourage you just as much as I possibly can to continue to do this. And, you know, at the actual workshop, at the con, I had put zinc cane just around a regular clear piece of glass for you to cut your glass and actually apply E6000 to. And, you know, a picture frame is not that much different. So a lot of you went and just bought some neat frames and have used that to make some new stuff. And I think that is absolutely wonderful. And I want to encourage you in that. And so if you guys ever want to reach out to me to get some free patterns, I will be more than willing to help you out. If you'll just give me, you know, the size of the frame that you're going to use, I'll draw you something up. So whenever you do the back of a stained glass piece, you it actually glows a little bit faster because the piece, or well, the line between two pieces of glass has actually been filled with solder at this point, so you don't have to do that again. So you go a little bit faster on the back, and oddly enough, the back is usually looks better for that reason. It's kind of a cruel thing. So let's talk about hanging stained glass while I'm soldering this. You will not find anyone else who is more anti-suction cup than me. And the reason for that is because of all the repairs I have had to make over the years, because people put, you know, a suction cup up in their window and their stained glass fell whenever condensation got on their window, or someone knocked it off, or their cat got interested in what was hanging there, or something like that. I strongly suggest that instead, if you can just put a simple nail or an eye hook in your wall up above your window, you can actually just hang a piece of chain from it and close that link of chain around the hook that we're going to put on the piece, and you can just hang it that way, and that way it just kind of swings around instead of falling down. For the freeform stuff, like the dragons and the fairies and that kind of thing, if you have cats, one of the coolest ways that you can, you know, preserve your work from falling in the floor whenever they get testy is to actually get those command strips that you can hang on the wall that people use for picture frames and stuff that doesn't harm your paint. If you can put, you know, just one edge of that, like on a windowsill or on a tabletop, and you basically are velcroing your stained glass to the surface where you put that command strip, and it works fantastic. Some people use museum glue. That's a little bit overkill, and believe me, it's a little cheaper to just grab a couple of command strips. You can even cut them up and use them use one for multiple things, but it works pretty well. I mean, you know, if you've got a really determined cat, don't get me wrong, you know, they'll find a way. But, you know, usually it's a pretty good deterrent. So we're almost done with this, and then after we finish this back side, that's when we get to load up the edges, and that's usually when you get a handful of solder. And I don't know if you've noticed on my hands, but I have a significant amount of little baby round scars, and they were all because of doing that. So if you have older dish towels or shop towels or something like that, just to preserve your own skin, I suggest that you grab one. That way the solder falls in it instead of in your hand. So, isn't that pretty? So now, we are actually going to take our flux, and we're going to flux this outside edge. And you see it's really built up from where I've just let the solder roll over, and that's fine because we're going to use every single bit of it. And one thing about solder is that, you know, you can always reheat it back up. So, what you want to do here is protect your hand with the towel. And another thing, I don't know if you've noticed, but I keep wiping my soldering iron tip. Oxidation happens really fast when you're soldering. So if you keep that tip really clean, you keep that from, you know, actually getting down in your solder lines. So what we're going to do here is I'm actually going to just heat up the solder and smooth it out. You see how I'm just tapping it? I mean, it really does not take much to heat this stuff up, especially on a really hot soldering iron like the one I'm using right now. This soldering iron is actually a fairly expensive one, but, you know, if I could be dating it, I probably would. That's how much of a difference it's made in the soldering that I do. So that's one edge. So we're going to take our towel and we're going to twist around. You're actually letting gravity do the work for you. So on this particular one, I've got a pretty big gob of solder here. So I'm actually going to grab some of that and just put it on this massive piece of glass that I solder on. It's kind of weird that I solder on a piece of glass, but it's about 1 inch thick. So it actually works really well, especially considering when I make a big stained glass window, I can actually put my huge pattern underneath the glass and preserve it. So you see how I'm kind of tilting it as I go. Again, I'm working with gravity here. And by the time that I get done with this kind of thing, I actually have like just a mountain of little globs of solder everywhere. But you can always pick them back up and use them. See how that just fell down? That could have been my hand. Just like that could have been my hand. Just a shop tail. That's all it takes. See how nice and pretty and smooth that is now? See how that could have been my hand? So we got 2 more edges here. Now, a lot of you may have stained glass in your house and just never even really noticed it. Leaded windows, that kind of thing. And the great thing is that, you know, I went to St. Augustine with Ryan and Maggie, Ryan Sidney and Maggie Schill, MM Schill, earlier this year. And we went to a museum in St. Augustine, and I was so busy looking at the stained glass that was just a natural part of the architecture of the museum that, you know, the displays that they had out were fine and everything, and I paid attention to them, but the stained glass was so old that I took more pictures of it than I did of the actual entries. What can I say? I'm a stained glass snob. I've earned it, I promise you. Okay, almost done. Now, You'd think that we'd be finished, but we're not. Now that you have done this outside edge, you're going to have like a little gobby spot of where each little individual solder line meets. So you want to clean that up. And all it takes is just to touch it and to just kind of smooth it out. And this is just one of those things that just makes your piece overall look a little bit more professional if you take just a second to just kind of join that up. And once you get done with one side, it's going to be, you know, there are also some places where some solder may have fallen on your solder line, like this right here. And you could even see a little thing that you need to smooth out a little bit. Just go back and look at what you've done. See, I've got like some solder that's just kind of hanging out over here. I just want to get rid of that. Now, we have to put a hook on it so that you can hang it. And in order to do that, I actually have some 16 gauge pre-tinned copper wire that I will use. And it'll come in a spool, you know, typically. So I will actually grab a pair of needle nose pliers. And you pretty much just make a loop. Just with your fingers. And then cut that off. Now, one thing that you want to keep in mind is that this is going to get really, really hot, really, really fast. So you definitely want to use pliers to be able to connect that. So you also want to look at what you've made. You want to make sure that you put the hook on the back of the piece. So we're actually going to put it here on this line because that's actually where our texture is. We don't want that marring up our pretty solder lines. The pretty solder lines that have a little bitty snag in right now. So, what you want to make sure that you do is that you want to close this end. You don't want one side of it coming off and the other side of it not. So I typically just go ahead and put a blob of solder down here at the end so that it's connected and it's just a loop. See what I mean? So now I'm going to hold this in place and I'm actually going to bury this in this solder line. If you bury it, then that means that it is not going to come apart on you. And you kind of want to build that solder up because the more you put on it, the stronger it's going to be, the less likely it's going to be to pull away. Well, ta-da! Now you have a sink kitchen. Now we have to clean it. Hold on just a minute. We're going outside. Welcome to the outside of quarantine Florence, Alabama. So, this is Cjs Flux Remover. Flux is an acid, so it's terribly important that you actually remove this from your stained glass. So, this is also quadruple zero steel wool. You can get it in your paint department at a hardware store. So, I've just combined this special soap with water, and I have steel wool. Now, I'm actually just going in little bitty circles here. Not only am I cleaning the solder lines that I just put on, I'm also using the steel wool to take the numbers off of the glass. You know, nothing's more crazy than, you know, getting it all cleaned and buffed and all happy and stick it in someone's window and number 86 is showing on the screen, on the glass. So just use that to be able to pull that off of there. So I'm just keeping my hand behind it, and I'm actually, you know, just trying to strengthen it up that way. I'm using this to go down each solder line and to also get the whole piece of glass. It takes a little while and a little bit of girl power to clean a big stained glass window, especially. Now, there are different treatments that you can put on your solder lines to make them copper or black or something like that. And this year I actually started offering that with my dragons. Now, when you do the outside edges, don't pull up on this tape. It's still tape. It is strong, don't get me wrong, but I mean, if you try to, you can pull it off. So the best way to do that is just kind of pinch it in the steel wool and just smoothly go around the edges. We're leaving this one silver because we want to see our solder lines. And where you put this hook on, you definitely want to make sure that you clean this thicker than usual stained glass joint. So, now that it's all soapy, you just rinse it off. And there you have it. There's your sun catcher. So I appreciate you being with me today. I hope you've learned something. If you have any questions or comments, please let us know. Thank you to JordanCon for the opportunity of providing a workshop to you from my very own glass shop. And, you know, anytime that you want a commission of stained glass, contact me. I also have an Etsy page with pre-made things that you can search through. I also fuse glass and make jewelry. But I'm just glad that at least I could be with you this way. I'm sorry that we're not going to be at the con this year, but really it's better that everybody stay healthy and safe. And I love all of you guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for being here.